5 whole years since I made this video with cage recommendations for mice, so I thought it was about time I made a brand new one for 2025 because standards have changed slightly. Some of these cages I now wouldn't recommend, and some of them have been discontinued and you can't find them anymore. So I just thought I'd do a new updated version with new cage recommendations, just in case you're thinking of getting mice or upgrading your current mice and you've no idea what to put them in. So when I'm sat here recommending cages and enclosures for mice, these are all going to be cages that meet the minimum that I follow when it comes to mice, and all ethical UK rescues are going to be looking for and recommending if you're adopting mice from them. So that is going to be 80 by 50 centimetres of floor space for around 3 to 4 mice, 100 by 50 centimetres for around 5 to 6 mice, and then 120 by 50 centimetres of floor space for larger groups of mice of 7, 8, 9 plus. So I have gone ahead and split these into budget options, mid-range options, and then slightly pricier cage options that are a little bit more of an investment. But if you are on a budget and you want to own mice, these are some of the options you've got. It's also worth keeping in mind this is from my perspective and what I've got available in the UK. If you're watching this from somewhere like Germany or America, your options are probably going to be a little bit different, and some of these you might not be able to access at all. So I apologise, this is just what I can find and what's available to me in the UK. So one of the first budget options is to use a 40-gallon tank or a bigger size, and that will either come with a mesh lid that is suitable for mice, or you might have to build your own, but this is still a really good option that can be quite affordable. Sometimes you might find these sold in stores for small pets. That's less common in the UK. I think in the US it's a lot more common to find these with the right type of lid, but you can just find these secondhand on places like Facebook Marketplace for quite cheap. And if you're in the UK, you can get them with a custom lid from a website called Peak Ponds and Aquariums. Your next option that can work out to be quite affordable is to make your own DIY enclosure. There are so many tutorials on YouTube of how to do this using things like IKEA furniture. Just bear in mind some of the older videos don't quite meet the minimum size recommendations anymore, but there's still things like the IKEA Linmon, the IKEA Detolf, especially if you do the DIY where you build a mesh lid for this to give them a bit more height, the IKEA packs, or just basing this off of your own idea. Just make sure you're making this as waterproof as possible and you're using a safe wood. Now, if you know me, you know that I'm the last person to promote supporting pets at home and buying anything from them. But if you are in a pinch and you do need a cage that meets the requirements, for the first time in their life, they have released some cages that do meet the minimum and go above the minimum. There is only 2 that I'm aware of that actually meet this though. There is the Pets at Home Plastic 3. This does meet the minimum compared to their other enclosures they sell that are not suitable at all, but it's not very deep for bedding and climbing toys for mice, so it's not going to be my first choice for them, but it does just about meet the minimum. There is then also the Pets at Home Habitat 3. This is a barred cage, and although it doesn't have very big opening doors on the front, it does have very small bar spacing compared to some other barred cages on the market. There's no unexpected big gaps in the corners or anything, which does make it pretty good for mice. It doesn't have the deepest space for bedding, but it meets the minimum and it is a lot cheaper than some other barred cages. Most of them tend to be around £80 for a cage of this size. This one is about £50 or so, which does make it a good option. I hate to say it, but yeah, that is an option. Another cheap option is to make your mice a bin cage. Although you might struggle to find a plastic storage tub that's big enough to meet the minimum. Some of them do taper down at the bottom and don't end up actually being the size that you think they are when you buy them. So if you can find a tub big enough, you can completely mesh out the top, even some of the sides for ventilation. It doesn't give you the best visibility of your mice, which to me does take away a bit of the enjoyment of keeping them in different types of cages, and it can get quite warm in the summer. So they're not the best option, but they are a budget option if you're struggling and your mice need more space. So moving on to some mid-range cages, one of the most popular ones in this category has to be the Savic Plaza cage. This one you can make some modifications to because the base of it's not the deepest in the world, but it is otherwise a really good enclosure because it does have a big front opening door that gives you plenty of interaction space with your mice, and you can, as I said, make some modifications to this. You can either attach things like grass mats around the side to allow you to put deeper bedding. This is something you can do with any barred cage, just to give them a few more inches of bedding in the base. Or there is a company in the UK called Viking Laser, and they make custom pieces of perspex that slot into the sides of the Savic Plaza to allow it to hold more bedding. This is obviously going to make it more expensive. I will put the price of this on screen, which is going to add on to the actual cost of the cage, but you can often find these secondhand on Marketplace. I just recently bought a Savic Plaza cage with the perspex included for £30–40, so they're out there, they're a really good option. You've then also got the Skyline Barney cage. This one again has got pretty small bar spacing for mice. It does have a big opening door on the top, but the front doors are quite tiny, you can just about fit your hands in, so I would prefer if the big door was actually on the front of the cage, just for ease of interacting with the mice. So that's why this one would probably not be one of my favourite options, just for accessibility. You've then got two pretty similar cages. You've got the Zoo Zone and the Doona. These are pretty much the same thing, and these are also quite common to find secondhand because they've been around, they've been in rotation amongst their own owners for such a long time, so you might be able to find these for a cheaper price. But there's only a couple of things with these that I would not choose these as my first option. They also only have the door on the top, and for most mice this is going to be very intimidating, very much like a predator coming down at them rather than interacting with them face to face. So that's why these two enclosures will never really be top of my recommendations, just because most mice are going to struggle with you coming down at them and that being your only option. Another option I've come across when browsing on Amazon recently is the Bevel hamster cage. This one looks like a knockoff of the Boucat State cages, which are quite popular with hamster and mouse owners. This looks like it's trying to be the Boucat State cage, and it's not quite the same. First thing with this is the gaps on the bars of the lid of this enclosure look pretty big. I can't from looking find any measurements of the bar spacing, but they do look pretty big, so you might have to mesh this or just completely change the lid. Also, it does have a front opening door, which I really like about enclosures like this. This one does look to be quite small compared to the Boucat State cage, and it's also weirdly quite low down on the front panel, which if you're putting in a bunch of bedding, that is going to cover up that front opening door or get in the way of it. So yeah, this is an option. This is out there, that it comes in different sizes, it looks like, but it's not the cheapest cage for a cage that is going to need a fair few modifications, or certain aspects might not work. Okay, moving on to pricier options. Of course, we have to mention the Boucat State cages. So many people are now using these with their hamsters and mice, and this was not available to us 5 years ago. So these come in a variety of different sizes and options. You've got the 2.0, and recently they have released the 3.0, and these come in 80 centimeters, 100 centimeters, 120 centimeters. Depending on how many mice you've got, there is a size option for you. This is the enclosure that I use behind me with my mice. It has got a big front opening door that you can easily access your mice from the front or the top, and you can also stack them if you want to. So if you've got multiple groups of mice or other rodents like hamsters and things that can also live in these enclosures, you can stack them and save space, which is great. So there's many things I like about these enclosures. There is a couple of things though. The ventilation for mice is not amazing. You might have to make a custom size lid with actual proper mesh on the top because it does only have ventilation slits. So just watch out for the ammonia levels in this because the ventilation is not the best, and it does make hanging things a little bit more tricky because you've not got that mesh to attach things to. Speaking of custom lids, if you're not someone that is very good at making things or DIY, or you've just not got the tools to do it, but you're wanting to buy things like the Boucat State enclosure, in the UK we have got Happy Henry Homes, and they make lids for Boucat State, IKEA Detolf, I think, and a couple of other enclosures. So might also be worth reaching out to them if you've got a specific enclosure in mind that you need a custom lid for. They might be able to do it for you, I'm not sure, but that is an option if you can't DIY one yourself and that's putting you off getting a Boucat State cage for your mice. Happy Henry Homes can make them. One option you might come across if you're searching for mouse or hamster cages on Amazon is the Pricey hamster cage. This is a pretty decent sized cage for mice. The only thing with this that I'm really confused about is there's barely any ventilation. The top lid section seems to be split into two, and only the tiny slither at the back has ventilation slits. I think the front of the lid is completely perspex, so if you were to buy this, even for hamsters, I would not be using this as it is. I would be popping out the perspex, the acrylic on the top, and filling this completely with mesh if possible, because there's just no ventilation on this, but otherwise it would be a pretty decent enclosure. Another slightly pricier option that is available on Amazon is the MeWoo enclosures. Although these are wooden, it's kind of like a wipeable texture that won't soak in their pee. Fingers crossed. You just need to be careful they're not chewing this because they can escape. Also with this, the lid is going to need some sort of modification again, just to add mesh or something for the ventilation and also ease of hanging their climbing things, hammocks, things like that. Another very similar option is the Night Angel Bigger World MDF. This has that same wipeable wood texture, although if your mice start to chew this and then pee on this, it is going to ruin it because it's going to get past that wipeable layer. So some mice this might work for, others they are going to jump straight to trying to chew this and it's not going to work. Also the lid is going to need replacing. I would not trust mice with a wooden lid of any sorts because if they can get their teeth around the top, they're going to start to chew this and they are going to escape. So the lid on this would definitely need modifying and just completely taking off and replacing with another one. There is also a website in the UK called hamsterhomes.com. These again make wooden enclosures that have really good mesh top lids. The only thing about this is it does seem to be untreated wood, which is going to very quickly ruin and spoil and get pee soaked very, very quickly with mice, and they could possibly chew these. So I would maybe stray away from these as an option, just because they are made from wood. Another pricier option is the Skyline Marrakesh cages. These come in multiple different sizes, and I think you can also get these in white as well. They're kind of like a vivarium varnished wood texture that's not going to soak in the mouse pee. They're not going to chew this probably, and it does have a very decent lid. It's just a very pricey enclosure that's going to set you back £200+ for the larger size. There's also the Furplar Stompster 120. This is like a hybrid between a tank and a topper, although again it has those tiny doors that you can just about put your hand through each of them, one on the front and then one also on the top. The sides of this are also made of wood, I think, which again, some mice are just going to test this and chew this and possibly escape. But it is an option if you are looking for something that you can put a deep layer of bedding, but then also has that ventilation area of a barred cage on top. It's an option if that's something that you are looking for. Another option that is on the pricier side but is a larger enclosure if you're looking to have a larger group of mice is the Savic Aura 120 small animal cage. This is an interesting, slightly ugly looking enclosure. The bars on this are very strange looking because it does have the plastic tray at the bottom, but then it also has a layer of perspex just to allow you to add more bedding, which I think is great. It's got a big front opening door, a big top opening door. It's a little bit like the Savic Plaza cage, so this is an option that has all of the things I've mentioned. It's got the good doors, it's got a deep base, and it's got good ventilation, so this is a decent option. So when it comes to the types of cages that I don't recommend, obviously any enclosures that don't meet the 80 by 50 centimetre minimum, unfortunately there are so many enclosures that just about miss the mark and they're like 75 by 50 or something. They're not far off, but I'm not gonna sit here and recommend them. There is also going to be some rat cages on the market that are as tall as they are wide, and they'll say in the description they're safe to use with mice as well. Unless you're really utilising and making that height difference very safe, I would not recommend using these with mice just because it can be quite a drop for them. You want to prioritise having that floor space and a bit of height, but not using cages that are way too tall for them. Most reptile vivariums as well I don't recommend using for mice just because they only have those tiny circular ventilation holes. These are not going to cut it when it comes to just how much ammonia mice are going to produce, and it's going to make them very sick. So unless you're doing some serious modification to a wooden reptile vivarium and meshing out the top or the sides, I would not recommend using them. I also don't recommend joining a bunch of smaller cages together to make up the total length or the total floor space. For the mice, ideally you want to have unbroken floor space, unbroken depth of bedding to put things, to hide things, to give them that space to dig and forage. I would not recommend buying a bunch of smaller cages and adding tunnels between them and things. As well, because these cages are quite expensive, it's going to work out better in the long run just to buy the appropriate size. One enclosure that is really popular is the wooden paw hut enclosures, and these are quite popular with hamster owners. I would hesitate to use these with mice just because they are wooden, although you can paint and treat the wood to make it waterproof. As soon as those mice start to chew that layer off that you've waterproofed and then start to pee on this, it's going to really quickly ruin that wood. So I would steer away from wooden enclosures because of the chewing and the peeing. There's also some popular plastic based cages like the Savic Hamster Heaven. I would not recommend this anymore because although it advertises as being 80 by 50 centimetres, it does taper into the base, and that does mean they are getting less space in the base, and that means less bedding as well. One cage that I used to recommend for mice that I would no longer recommend, and I'm going to be selling all of my spare ones of these, is the Alaska cage, which is such a shame because it does have a really good front opening door. But I have used these with rescue mice over the years. I've tried to modify them over the years, and it's just been a nightmare. There's just so many gaps on this cage that aren't consistent. The bar spacing in the corners ends up being too big, and the doors have a really big hole where it actually attaches to the bars. You can fit like your whole finger or thumb through that, so the mice end up going through it as well and escaping. So unless you're planning on meshing out the entire outside of it, I would not recommend Alaska cages as a first option for mice. The last type of enclosure that I know some people do use with their fancy mice, but I would not recommend as a first option, is Exoterra enclosures. I have used these temporarily with rescue mice in the past, or sick and elderly mice in the past, and over the years they have just chewed the plastic like front vent thing. They've also chewed all of the silicone around the glass of the tank, and the mesh the Exoterras come with is so fine that you can't really hang anything from it. It's quite flimsy and weak on the top. It can't really hold a whole lot of weight, so not the best for hanging climbing toys and things for them. There are much better options out there, considering the Exoterras are not really that cheap. But those are just some of my recommendations when it comes to enclosures for mice. Hopefully I've given you a good range of budget, all the way up to pricier long-term options. Obviously there's going to be some enclosures that I've not mentioned or I've missed, or some really good options in your country that I'm not even aware of, so I couldn't possibly mention all of them, but hopefully this has given you a good selection of enclosures to pick from, and hopefully you'll find one that suits you and your mice. But I hope this video was helpful. Don't forget to subscribe, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye!